Good afternoon. It's wonderful to see so many of you joining us today. Welcome to the first TEQSA Talks of this year, 2026. My name is Julie Pearce and I'm the Director of Communications and Engagement at TEQSA, and I'll be your MC for the afternoon. So today I'm delighted to be joined by CEO Dr. Mary Russell, Acting Director of the Higher Education Integrity Unit, Dr. Lenka Ucnik, and almost, I'll explain that in a minute, by Executive Director Regulatory Operations, Jen Bahen. So Jen will be joining us, but in a pre-recording. She's currently in Manila with some of our team to lead a knowledge exchange program with the Philippines Higher Education Regulator, the Commission of Higher Education, or CHED. So this program's part of a broader initiative as part of our partnership with the Southeast Asia and Australia government-to-government program. She does wish she could be here, and I'm sure she'll be tuning into the recording. So our speakers today will also form our panel to answer your questions at the end of today's session. So before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge country. In the spirit of reconciliation, TEQSA acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Our TEQSA office, where we are today, is located on the traditional land of the Wurundjeri people, part of the Kulin Nation. And today, importantly, as part of National Close the Gap Day, I do encourage you to read the report that's been launched as part of the activities happening around Australia. So the report is named Community Voices, the Pathway to Justice, Equality and Healing. Okay, so our agenda for TEQSA Talks today is as follows. So Dr. Mary Russell will open and set the context for launching consultation on one of the pillars of TEQSA's new regulatory strategy. That pillar is called the Regulatory Risk Framework, or RRF. As part of this, Mary will also provide an update on some key areas of focus for TEQSA. And then from afar, Jen Bahen will launch consultation on the Regulatory Risk Framework. Then we're going to hear from Dr. Lenka Ucnik as she and her team launch an updated academic integrity kit for the sector today. There's a lot happening today. So following her update, Dr. Ucnik will move to a moderated question and answer session. So the panel for our Q&A is a small one today, but a very mighty one that will include Mary, Lenka, and to some degree myself. As with previous TEQSA Talk seminars, we've set aside some time for Q&A before closing the session. So in submitting your questions, please do use the dedicated Q&A function in Zoom. Questions will come through to us to be posted to Lenka, actually, as our moderator, and she'll direct them for response during that Q&A session. You can start posing questions at any time during the session. And if for any reason you can't access the Q&A function, please submit your questions to the following email address, and it's on the screen. So it's comms, COMMS, @teqsa.gov.au. So please note that this webinar will be recorded and uploaded to TEQSA's website next week. I'm now going to hand over to our CEO, Dr. Mary Russell. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Julie. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. A lot has happened since our last TEQSA Talks in September, and even since our conference in November last year, less than 6 months ago. We've experienced a period of sustained activity and, in many respects, accelerated change across the higher education sector. We've captured some of that activity in the timeline on screen. Now that slide is really busy because it has been really busy. It's okay, there won't be a quiz later on. What the activity shows quite clearly though is that the environment in which we're all operating is evolving quickly and often in response to complex and at times confronting issues. So I want to take a few minutes to walk through some of the key developments and what they mean from a regulatory perspective. First, I want to acknowledge the issue of anti-Semitism. In the shadow of the Bondi Beach attack and the broader rise in anti-Semitic incidents, there has been a strong and necessary focus on the safety and well-being of students and staff across our institutions. TEQSA responded to the experience of students during the protests and upheaval on campuses in recent years by issuing a statement of regulatory expectations, focused on student complaints and grievance mechanisms. These critical mechanisms are often the first point of recourse for students experiencing harm or threats to their safety and participation, and the mechanisms must be accessible, effective and trusted. At the start of the new academic year, Professor Kerry-Lee Krause and I wrote to all Vice-Chancellors, reinforcing the importance of maintaining safe learning environments and acting promptly when issues emerge. At a broader level, led by David Gonski, the Anti-Semitism Education Task Force has been established and TEQSA is participating alongside the Department of Education and others across the education sector. The task force is looking across the continuum of education with an initial focus on building capacity. The focus is on supporting institutions to engage with anti-Semitism issues thoughtfully, respectfully and with practical impact. This includes developing resources that can support schools to implement anti-Semitism training and developing capabilities and behaviours for engaging with others with sensitivity and respect. Higher education providers will also need to be considering how to embed policies and practices that ensure students and staff engage respectfully and constructively. This will not be easy work, and over time will mean revisiting some of the established expectations and practices that we've held. Within TEQSA, our staff have been undertaking anti-Semitism training, developed and delivered by Associate Professor David Sluky from Monash University with his team, to ensure that our regulatory work is informed, aware and responsive to anti-Semitism. You'll also be aware that the Royal Commission into Anti-Semitism and Social Cohesion is now underway, and that recommendations from the Special Envoy to Combat Anti-Semitism, Gillian Siegel, are being woven into broader sector reforms. The message here is clear. Anti-Semitism and other forms of racism need to be both prevented and responded to when they occur in higher education. This is not peripheral to quality, it is integral to it. Linked to this, the Higher Education Standards Panel has been consulting on the potential inclusion of a new standard relating to racism into the threshold standards. While decisions are yet to be finalised, the direction of travel here is clear. The broad collective of focused responses underway signals the importance of proactively addressing the risks and responses to racism in all of its forms in your higher education environment. Subject to any changes to the standards, TEQSA will provide additional clarification about what we expect to see from providers in practice. So turning now to the ever-heightening focus on academic integrity, and in particular, the impact of artificial intelligence and commercial cheating services. Threats to academic integrity have continued to evolve and challenge the sector and students. Back in November, TEQSA released a student academic misconduct toolkit, and just last month, Professor Krause and I issued a sector alert highlighting the continued activity of commercial academic cheating services, including their presence on campus. We continue to take action to disrupt those services, including continuing to block illegal cheating websites that target Australian students. Key responses in control of providers are how your institution strategically designs assessment to ensure confidence in the achievement of academic outcomes and award integrity. Also, how you support students to engage honestly with their learning and how they adapt and responsively use technologies that are advancing at pace. Later in this conversation, Dr. Lenka Ucnik will elaborate on a more recent initiative to assist in promoting academic integrity and addressing commercial academic cheating within providers. Another area of focus for TEQSA has been the intersection of higher education and concerns about the quality in early childhood education. Many of you would be aware of public commentary in recent months expressing concerns about some quality issues in the education of early childhood educators. Quality education matters deeply. These graduates work with some of the most vulnerable people in our community, young children. Early childhood educators play a critical role, and it's important that their theoretical and practice-based learning is of good quality. In response to emerging risks in November last year, TEQSA and ASQA released a joint sector alert, particularly in relation to emerging risk around workplace learning. Our risk-targeted work in this area is continuing. Transnational education is another space where we're seeing both growth and increasing complexity. For many providers, transnational education, or TNE, is an important or emerging part of their activities. While there are some providers who have long experience in TNE, it's also a new and growing focus for many providers. What is clear is that TNE models are diversifying and the regulatory context is becoming more complex. TEQSA needs to and expects to maintain good visibility of these activities wherever they occur. The passing of the Education Legislation Amendment Bill, now the ELA Act, created new requirements in the TEQSA Act, including a requirement for authorisation to undertake TNE. This reflects the government's intent to strengthen oversight and ensure consistency in the quality of Australian education that is delivered internationally. 57 providers applied for transition into these new arrangements at the commencement, and we're aware of other providers who are preparing for TNE activity. TEQSA is working with our regulatory counterparts in key markets for the Australian TNE to ensure strong relationships, understanding of risks and requirements that can support and assure quality delivery. More broadly, we're operating in a period of significant sector-wide reform. The final report of the Expert Council on University Governance was released in October last year, and the Higher Education Standards Panel has consulted on how the principles might be incorporated into the threshold standards. The quality and effectiveness of institutional and academic governance will continue to be an ongoing focus for TEQSA this year. Legislation to establish the Australian Tertiary Education Commission, the ATEC, is still before the Senate. And consultation to modernise and strengthen TEQSA's legislative or regulatory powers was led by the Department of Education. Minister Clares signalled his intention to move this work forward later this year. So this update reflects some of the very rapid change in higher education. We'll continue to update you as TEQSA responds to this changing landscape. Before I turn to what I want to do I want to briefly highlight a few key updates though. So TEQSA will shortly be calling for expressions of interest for a new student advisory panel. This is a really important step for us, ensuring that the lived experiences of students and their perspectives continue to inform our work in a deliberate and meaningful way. So keep an eye out for our TEQSA communication channels for some more information about that. We're also progressing work to streamline regulation through the government's Better Regulation Working Group and to progress this work with other regulators and agencies. So this work's about reducing unnecessary burden while maintaining confidence in the quality and outcomes of higher education. All of this brings me to our work to progress TEQSA's new regulatory strategy. The continuing and emerging issues I've outlined today across student safety, academic integrity and system reform are all interconnected. And they point to a need for a regulatory approach that is forward-looking and focused on issues and risks that emerge and impact the sector widely, as well as our ongoing work with individual providers. As part of this, we're launching for consultation today one of the pillars of the new regulatory strategy, the Regulatory Risk Framework, or RRF, which is actually quite difficult to say. At our TEQSA conference, I shared our intent to continue to develop a new regulatory strategy. The case for change has stayed strong. The higher education environment is not standing still, and neither can we. We're seeing increasing complexity in how education is delivered. We're seeing rapid technological change and how that impacts on academic integrity and learning outcomes. And we're seeing amplified community expectations around governance, around student and staff safety and wellbeing, and around the overall quality of the student experience, and ultimately the return on public investment in higher education. Meanwhile, the regulatory environment itself continues to shift. A strong focus on system-wide accountability points to a more demanding operating environment and the need for regulators to be well connected in our work. So the question for us is not whether we change, but how we change. A key part of our response is to evolve our regulatory strategy to be more focused, more transparent, and ensure we're better able to respond to risk where and when it emerges. That means sharpening how we identify risk, how we prioritise our regulatory effort, and how we work with providers to support quality outcomes. It also means being clearer with you about what we're seeing and what we're concerned about, and where we're directing our attention. Revising our strategy initially involves making 3 major shifts, and I spoke about these in November at our conference. A lot's happened since then, so just to reiterate, the first shift is retiring the quantitative risk model that TEQSA has used for many years to assess individual provider risk. The second is reducing prescriptive, paperwork-heavy processes that don't capture how providers actually manage risk, and this needs to be part of our risk assessment. The third is rebalancing our effort between provider-specific assessments and sector-wide risk analysis so that we can act earlier, proportionately, and in the public interest when systemic risks emerge. Today, I want to introduce one of the key pillars of our new regulatory strategy. We're launching for consultation the Regulatory Risk Framework, or RRF. Many of you have provided early input into the framework already through workshops and targeted consultation. We're really grateful for that input. We thank you for your involvement and you'll be able to see today, I think, that it's helped to shape the consultation draft that we are launching. So here's why the RRF is important. First, the new framework focuses on management of risks that are aligned with the threshold standards. In fact, it's designed to make the link between the standards and key risks much clearer than it has been in the past. Secondly, it will increase focus on evidence of the effectiveness of the provider's own risk management of key risks. Regulatory responses from TEQSA will be informed by assessment of the extent to which and the significance of unmanaged risk. This will mean that our regulatory response to a particular risk will differ between providers according to how effectively they're responding to and managing that risk themselves. These changes will support a regulatory approach more closely aligned to the activities that providers should already have embedded in their practice and their institutional reporting. These more proactive approaches to sector risks matter because they go to the core of TEQSA's purpose, which is to prevent potential harms, safeguard quality and maintain confidence in Australian higher education. So today also marks the start of consultation on this important pillar of TEQSA's regulatory strategy. Submitting a written submission or even just a short email in response to consultation is not a regulatory requirement, but it is an opportunity for you to shape the framework. Executive Director of Regulatory Operations, Jen Bahen, who's been leading this important work supported by her team, is delivering some key training on regulatory risk today and isn't with us. And while she can't be here live in the TEQSA Talks webinar, we're about to share a pre-recorded message that dives deeper again into the intent of the framework and encourages your input. Thank you. I'll now hand over to our producer to play the pre-recorded video. Before I do, just a reminder that we encourage you to put your questions into the Q&A as we go today. I've done enough talking at you today, but I look forward to joining the panel at the end of the conversations and to hearing your questions and some of your initial thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And thank you for joining this important TEQSA Talks, where we're launching consultation of the Regulatory Risk Framework, which has previously been known as the Risk and Quality Assurance Framework, or the RQF. I join you as a pre-record today through the magic of technology, as I'm currently in Manila working with colleagues at the Commission of Higher Education as part of the Australian Government's Southeast Asia Government-to-Government Partnership Program, where we're strengthening regulatory capability and sharing knowledge across the region. This is an important piece of work to complement and strengthen TEQSA's new regulatory responsibilities with respect to transnational education and do our bit to support regulatory environments that encourage high-quality Australian offerings. However, I'm delighted to still be able to join this TEQSA Talks webinar, somewhat, to help launch the consultation for the Draft Regulatory Risk Framework, or as we'll call it, the RRF. Before I dive into the launch, let's revisit where we're up to. TEQSA was established almost 15 years ago in a very different higher education environment. The sector has grown, diversified, globalised, and become much more complex, with community expectations evolving also. Students, government, and the public increasingly expect regulators to demonstrate that their work returns clear public value. Recently, TEQSA has been signalling that we are evolving our regulatory approach to meet that changing landscape, including through Mary's keynote presentation at last year's TEQSA conference. The proposed regulatory risk framework is one of the early pillars of that evolution. For some of you, this framework won't be brand new. Many of you will have already been engaged in consultations and conversations on the RRF and have helped shape the current structure and thinking. So the framework has been developed iteratively, tested internally, and early sector engagement has helped shape the form of the document that we're putting forward to you today. At last year's conference, Mary shared that we would consult on the RRF in the first quarter of 2026, and so here we are. TEQSA needs a framework that clearly articulates the risks that are relevant to our regulatory work and how we assess those risks. The RRF is intended to support greater transparency and consistency in the way that TEQSA identifies and considers provider-level risk. The RRF establishes a framework that translates the requirements of the threshold standards and the ESOS National Code into expected regulatory outcomes and identifies the key risks to the achievement of those outcomes. In the framework, TEQSA has identified 8 risk focus areas, which are fundamental to the outcomes that the threshold standards, National Code, TEQSA and ESOS Acts intend to achieve. For each of the 8 risk focus areas, the RRF identifies the key risks articulated to bellwether threshold standards and critical sections of the National Code. Each risk focus areas also includes supporting descriptors intended to assist providers in continuing to develop and monitor self-assurance capabilities, noting, of course, that outcomes of provider self-assurance activities are just one important input that TEQSA considers in regulatory assessments and decisions. Monitoring and responding to these risks should be an ongoing part of each higher education provider's risk management and self-assurance activities. The risk focus areas do not add additional requirements beyond those set out in the threshold standards or the ESOS National Code. The framework also does not lessen the parts of the threshold standards or National Code that are not explicitly named. However, as we are a risk-based regulator, the framework clarifies key outcomes that the regulator is trying to achieve and provides a frame against which risks and risk management can be consistently monitored across the regulatory life cycle. As important as it is to talk about what the RRF is, it's equally important to talk about what it isn't. It is not designed to add work to your compliance efforts. Effective management of risk is key to the successful and sustainable operation of higher education providers. Accordingly, contemporary expectations of good governance would include monitoring and management of key risks and oversight of risk management by the organisation's executive leadership and governing body. Over time, done well, this should lead to less regulatory complexity. It is not a standalone or sole determinant that determines regulatory action. TEQSA triangulates risk information with multi-source and multi-agency data and intelligence. And we'll explain more about this as we continue to build the broader regulatory strategy. It's not an articulation of whole-of-sector risk, but rather of individual provider risk, and should be proportionate to provider category and context. And so today, we officially launch consultation of the Regulatory Risk Framework, the earliest pillar of the broader TEQSA regulatory strategy. We want to consult to test sector understanding of the framework and to seek feedback on the structure, concepts and explanations so that the framework is clear and meaningful, both for you and for us. This sector has already made valuable contributions to this work over the past couple of years, and this consultation is an opportunity to further refine the approach. Consultation opens today, 19th of March, and if you choose, you can make submissions through to Thursday, 30th of April 2026. The consultation paper for the RRF will go live on the TEQSA website after this session, and we'll also share updates and the links via our usual communication channels. The consultation paper has questions to support focused feedback on the RRF itself, but you can choose to comment on some or all of the questions, and if there's just one thing that you want to say, then please feel free just to send us a short email. Please make submissions via the email address in the consultation paper, which will be regulatorystrategy@teqsa.gov.au. So in closing, we appreciate the constructive engagement that has already helped shape this work. Please engage with the consultation materials and share your perspectives. Reach out to us if there's something you'd like to discuss. Our goal is simple. We want to offer a regulatory approach that is clear, consistent, proportionate, risk-based, and ultimately focused on protecting the quality and reputation of Australian higher education for the students who depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I know you'll be keen to watch this once you're back on shore. Just to reiterate the call to action that Jen called out, and that's inviting you to respond to the consultation paper. So on the screen, you'll see the details, but we are now officially open for consultation on the regulatory risk framework. So you'll find the consultation paper live on the TEQSA website right now at teqsa.gov.au/consultation. And we'll also send an email to all attendees in coming days with a link to the consultation paper, along with sharing on our usual channels, including LinkedIn and eNews. We invite you to respond by Thursday, the 30th of April 2026. And now, for more good news for the sector, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Lenka Ucnik.
Thanks very much, Julie. So it's really lovely to be here today because I'm very excited to announce that today TEQSA is launching the updated Academic Integrity Toolkit. As some of you might be aware, the original toolkit the development was led by Tracy Brettag and was published in 2020. But since then, a lot has changed and many things have evolved. So this particular toolkit, the development was led by Associate Professor Guy Curtis from the University of Western Australia, who was actually on the original team who developed the 2020 toolkit. Professor Curtis was assisted in developing this with a team of other people from different providers who I shall name now, so I'm not missing anyone. I'd like to thank Professor Jo Clare, Dr. Rebecca Owdrey, Associate Professor Christine Slade, Associate Professor Amanda White, Mr. Kane Murdoch and Dr. Cameron Fole. Additionally, in developing this toolkit, Associate Professor Curtis conducted a survey with Australasian Academic Integrity Network to get an idea of the user experience of the existing toolkit, and he used that information to inform the updated content. As you can see from this toolkit, which is now on the screen, it is divided into 5 modules, each one with its own theme, and each module has a short introductory video to provide an overview of what to expect. Each of the modules has a combination of some old material that has been transferred over, some updated material just to make it more current, and also some new guidance and case studies. And we've also included, as you can see there from one of the tiles, there is a section now on risks to academic integrity from AI. So I encourage you all to go and see this resource, and I am sure you will not be disappointed. Also, can you go to the next slide? Also, as with any big blockbuster release, there is already a sequel prepared. So today we are launching the first stage of this, which has the updated structure and landing pages. It has the new videos for each section and also the new and updated case studies. And then the second stage of the release will have an updated good practice note and also guides such as substantiating contract cheating, guides for investigators with some real practical tips on what to do, what to look for, how to identify certain issues, role-specific guide to promoting academic integrity, and also an overview of culture and academic integrity. All of the new content on the page will be labelled new, so we have thought of the user experience in our updates, so you will be easily able to identify what has been updated and what has not. So thank you very much, and I hope that you enjoy what we have developed. Back to you, Julie.
Thank you. There's a lot of material to go through. It's great material. I've had the advantage of having a look at it before it went up, so encourage you all to tune in. Now, Lenka, I believe in your very multi-talented way, you are now about to moderate our Q&A session. So I'm going to hand over to you and Mary.
Thank you very much, Julie. For those of you who haven't posed a question yet, please get into that Q&A function and write your questions now, because Mary is ready to answer them for you. However, Mary, here is the first question for you. Is the new student advisory panel for domestic students only, or is it open to international students as well?
Thank you. So what we're looking for in that panel, we will continue the established consultation mechanisms that we already have with student peak bodies. So that includes the National Union of Students, it includes various postgraduate student and international student groups. But as we compose the student advisory panel, we'll be deliberately looking to make sure that we have varied perspectives. So it will be a combination of merit-based selection, but ensuring that we have diversity of perspectives that are important for us to understand the student experience for our work. So at the time of calling for expressions of interest, we'll actually also be quite transparent about what that particular mix of participation is. For example, we want to have participation from students who are in both university environments, but also independent providers, probably postgraduate, undergraduate, but also students whose experience might be somewhat different from others. That will all be important, and we will be transparent about what we're looking for.
Okay, thank you. Here is a question. Can there be training specifically for risk staff within organisations? I believe this will be referring to the new RRF and expectations.
Look, that's a good question, and I don't have a definitive answer for that. What I would invite you to do is look at the document first. I think when you look at it, it won't be as different from what you're already doing as what you might expect. You might in fact see that there's a lot of alignment. But what I'd invite you to do is when you provide consultation feedback, either be that like really comprehensive or even just a short email, if there are particular areas where you think you and your colleagues are going to need a discussion or training or some further engagement with TEQSA to think in a really meaningful way about how you're going to implement this, then include that in your feedback, and we'll use that to inform our thinking about further training or further webinars or other ways of engaging with you around that. The intention is that it gives you a lot of transparency about how we think about risk in our regulatory work, but also that it makes it clear for your own internal purposes for risk management and risk reporting. So we want to make sure that we have a shared understanding about what this looks like both in theory but also in practice.
Okay, so here's another question about the RRF. How will TEQSA use the RRF in relation to private higher ed providers and government-funded universities?
So the answer is pretty much the same. So when you look at the risk framework, what you will see is that it lines up very closely with the standards. And as we all know, the standards are written at that principle level because they apply but are translated differently according to the context of individual providers. You know, the way the standards are given effect will differ according to a small provider or a regional or major city provider, or according to the mix of students. So I don't think it will necessarily be different according to whether it's a large publicly funded provider or a small provider. The risk framework should apply, and if you think that it doesn't apply well to your context, then please tell us that as part of our framework. One of the things that Jen said is really important here is that the risk framework explains how we think about and go about assessing and understanding risk, but it's not the only thing that we use in making regulatory decisions. So, we will always take into account the provider's context, the provider's regulatory history, other risk intelligence, and as I said, really, really importantly, the work that the provider might already have done to identify risks, to respond to them internally, to be monitoring and responding to those with ongoing work. So the differences that you might see between providers are going to be more about how effectively providers are managing the risks for them rather than differences that are according to scale.
All right, thank you, Mary. So this question is about the toolkit and AI. So I'll take this one so Mary can have a bit of a break. So the question goes, thanks for the toolkit, it looks great. I didn't have to read that bit out, but I wanted to. Can you say anything more about the regulatory approach to academic integrity given recent concerns about students using AI? So as you may be aware from the e-news from last year around April or May, where the CEO announced that TEQSA is moving from predominantly an educative-led to a regulatory-led approach to Gen AI, we have since continued to embed those considerations into our regulatory processes, and the focus has remained the same as it has been throughout our educative-led approach, which is the things that we really want providers to focus on are to make sure that their methods of assessment accurately reflect the learning outcomes that students are required to achieve as part of their degree. Now, this will be up to the provider to manage that risk. However, we also understand that students will use AI. We also understand that students will need to learn how to use AI ethically and appropriately. However, providers will need to put in certain checkpoints and assurances along the way where they might have to have a moment where students have to demonstrate their knowledge without relying on other tools so that providers have that necessary assurance that they've met the learning outcomes of their award. How providers do that is up to them, and we've provided quite a lot of guidance and resources, including last year's enacting assessment reform, which sort of demonstrated 3 pathways that providers are predominantly taking, whether that is securing things at a programmatic level, securing things at a unit level, or some kind of hybrid of the two. I recommend any provider who is still grappling with this issue to go and have a look at our resources. I think they are very clear and targeted. However, in our regulatory approach, TEQSA will be looking at those assurances of learning and how they're being managed. Okay, now I will move on to the next question. This one is for you again, Mary. Are there any other elements of the new regulatory strategy which have not been mentioned today? And if so, what is the anticipated timeline for consultation and implementation? And I imagine that might be referring to that slide where it had the different sections.
So the answer is yes, there are other elements. I'm not going to give you precise timelines, but I can give you a sense of what we are working on next. So it's really important that we land the regulatory risk framework first, because that is really important for us to update and strengthen our regulatory process, be that our routine assessment processes, but also our compliance processes. The next 2 things that we will be working on will be to develop and then consult on a set of regulatory principles. Some of you, both students and providers, have had input into some possible examples of what those might look like at our conference in the last year. Regulatory principles are really important because they give greater clarity about how we go about implementing the requirements for us to be risk-based and operate in accordance with necessity and proportionality, the ways that we consider things when we're making decisions and going about our work. So this is really important both for us to ensure that we are consistent and accountable about that internally, but in order to make that public so that it's clear to you and the whole community how we go about applying those principles in our regulatory work. So that's the next piece of work that we will be developing and coming out for consultation. As many of you will know from the consultation that the department led last year and the announcements from Minister Clare, there's also consideration being given to how TEQSA might have legislative powers and focus that are more responsive to risks that affected the sector as a whole, rather than our existing Act, which is framed much more in terms of things that impact individual providers. So we have started work about what a proportionate and risk-based approach might be to monitoring, to assessing and analysing, to sharing information about sector risks, and also to responding to sector risks and making sure that across providers in the sector these are being managed effectively. That's a substantially bigger part of the work, but we do want to go ahead and progress the development of that and consult on that in anticipation of the legislative changes that will be considered. So those are the two things that you'll see coming through the pipeline. All of these and the other parts of the regulatory strategy will ultimately knit together, but we've taken the decision to develop them piece by piece, partly because that's more pragmatic for us and we can start rolling them out into our practice. And we know that the timeline for providers around regulatory change needs to be quite considered. I would not want us to come out with a completely changed or updated regulatory strategy that didn't have enough lead time for you to consider how that might apply to your own operations, to consider how that might apply to any assessments that you have in the time frame. So this will be a very considered transition and we will of course take into account the impacts of any changes on providers who have live processes with us.
Okay, Mary, here is a question that I imagine will be short and sharp. The SRE on workplace obligations is due on Monday the 6th of April, which is Easter Monday, and so a public holiday. Will submission date be extended to 7th of April?
I will undertake to look at that so that if you are not already queued up to submit by that time, that we can give you an update about whether there's an alternate time for that. So thank you for calling that out. We will follow that up and we'll send out some information. Julie, what will the form of that be?
That's a good question. Sorry, Mary.
We'll send that in one of our upcoming emails to the sector. Thank you.
All right. Here's a question I think that might be a good opportunity just to clarify something that I think you've already sort of touched upon. Will the delay between data reporting and risk assessment publication be shortened? Which is we're not publishing them anymore.
I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to there. I'm going to presume that you're referring to the lag between data being submitted to, for the taxi data collection and publication or finalisation of that data. That is the lag there. Effectively, we've operated on a 2-year lag in that data, and one of our key reasons for retiring that form of risk assessment is that we feel that a 2-year lag is too long in a very dynamic higher education environment to give us a realistic picture of the risks faced by providers, including the fact that some of that data shows what are already lag indicators. So that is one of our reasons for retiring at that. The other is that we are really conscious that it's not just the inherent risk that is important, it's having a proper assessment of how effectively that risk has been managed. So I apologise if I've misunderstood the data that you're referring to, but if it relates to that data submitted for taxi, that is the answer. We will still collect that and analyse it, but not at an individual provider level. So we will use it in aggregate to help us to monitor for trends and changes in the sector. We're looking at what we need to do to update then our annual risk reporting and looking at what part that lag data should play in that, along with other sorts of risk intelligence that we can include in that sort of reporting that might be practically useful and meaningful to you as members of the sector.
Okay, thank you. Here is one that I can take. So again, Mary can have a bit of a rest. What's the best way to utilise the Academic Integrity Toolkit to help institutions refine and update generative AI action plans? So the toolkit itself will provide some guidance on how to manage integrity risks in relation to Gen AI. So you can have a look at those to understand what kind of mitigation strategies you might want to put in place. However, I also recommend that you revisit the Emerging Practice Toolkit that was published at the end of 2024, I think in November, which was kind of the first resource to come out of that sector-wide RFI that TEQSA held. That's a really clear guide because each of the sections has checkboxes on short and medium and long-term activities. That is not a prescriptive or fulsome list, but it gives you a good idea of the kind of key considerations that you should be sort of thinking about when kind of developing your institutional action plans. However, I recommend you just go onto TEQSA's AI Knowledge Hub, and there are a lot of resources with guidance and practical tips and strategies for you to incorporate into your AI action plans. Mary, there have been a couple of questions regarding what is happening with the T&E transition applications.
Thank you. So we appreciate the work that providers did with us to turn around a pretty quick response to those. So we received, as I said, I think 57 applications. The clear majority of those have already been finalised. There are a number of those that are still under assessment and they're being progressed as a priority. We're also aware that some providers that don't already have that active footprint in T&E are working on developing plans around T&E, and so separate to the transition arrangements, there is an appropriate application process for authorisation that is being finalised by our teams. So if you have any queries in relation to the specific circumstances of your institution, please reach out through our inquiries team and that will be forwarded to the correct regulatory team for response.
Thank you. So this one here is about how TEQSA is going to get assurances about the maturity level of provider risk. So how will TEQSA seek assurance of our maturity levels with regard to risk? Is it going to be annually? Will it be a report be submitted? Will requests be made on a regular basis? Or will it happen with our re-registration applications?
So I think the thing that it's really important to remember about this risk approach is it's about how you embed it in your own operations. So where we have highlighted that we think that there are particular risks of importance that relate to the threshold standards, we would expect that for each and every provider, you also consider, well, what does that mean for us? What does that risk look like in our institution? You know, are we sufficiently assured that we have the right policies and processes in place, that we have the capacity and resources in place to manage that we're monitoring any particular risks, that we've done some sort of audit or assurance activity around key areas where we think we might be a bit more exposed in terms of risks. What reporting do we have in place that regularly updates our governing body or our academic governing body about how we're tracking with these? So the really important thing is that you regularise that internally. Now, the reason I'm sharing that is that this is very much designed to ensure that when we do ask for information, the first and most important thing that we're relying on is the information that you already collect and report internally. That has been an inherent part of our self-assurance approach that we've been developing and implementing over the last couple of years. So if we have contact with a provider about a compliance matter, or if you're coming up for re-registration with TEQSA, we would expect that as part of developing a self-assurance report or part of providing evidence and information to us, you go to that information. You know, you say, this is the information that we routinely collect, this is how it's been reported to the governing body, this is what the governing body and our executive and risk teams have done in response to that risk, this is the ongoing program of assurance. And that's not going to be the same for each and every risk, it's going to vary according to your circumstances and the risks that are more or less prominent for you. So it does allow an approach that means that the evidence we ask for going forward is very much tailored to your circumstance, and is informed as a starting point by the ways that you are managing and monitoring risks. So if I give you a couple of really good lived examples about this, when TEQSA issued our Statement of Regulatory Expectation around compliance with workplace obligations, there are a number of providers that use that as a basis for doing their own self-assessment to see where they were comfortable that they were meeting the requirements and where there might be weak points or points that needed further risk management or further action. They all then reported those internally, developed action plans where needed, and some of those providers shared that with us, not because they were obliged to, but just because of good practice. Now, that sort of proactive approach gives us really good visibility and gives us quite a level of confidence that we can see and understand how risks are being managed in a provider. So depending on the type of assessment that you're coming into contact with TEQSA for, the exact information you give us might be a bit different, but that's the principle. The starting point and the kind of the meat in your self-assurance statement is not just about the policies and procedures you have, it's how you are confident about how you're dealing with it. How do you know that what you've got in place is working? And that's the sort of evidence that we will be looking for to begin any sort of engagement with you, be it a routine regulatory assessment or a compliance matter. I hope that helps, but I'm really happy to take further questions about that as well.
Okay, thank you. And this will be the final question, as I can see we are coming to time. Taking into consideration that there's still a bit of lack of clarity around the ATEC legislation, could you please talk a little bit about how you envisage TEQSA working effectively with ATEC?
Thank you. So a lot of people are asking this question. So I have to preface my answer by saying the ATEC at the present is only an interim ATEC, and none of us can answer this with certainty until the legislation has been fully considered and decided in the Parliament. What I can say though is that the interim ATEC has been really clear that ATEC is not a regulator, but it is a system steward. So if you look at the legislation, the carve-out of what the ATEC is looking for is different in a couple of really important respects. Firstly, it has a much longer horizon. So the ATEC legislation is crafted so that ATEC is really stewarding the higher education sector in accordance with long-term national priorities, agendas and needs. Now that's different to the type of timeline and the type of risk focus that TEQSA has. There will be a relationship with any future ATEC in relation to the threshold standards. Many of you will know that while the standards in the past have been managed by the Higher Education Standards Panel, it is proposed that the ownership and responsibility for the standards would sit within a future ATEC, and the exact arrangements for how they would be made and informed are still open for decision, but obviously the standards are really one of our key tools for regulation as well. So what we are prioritising is to have establish really good dialogue with the ATEC. When issues of importance emerge, we're using them as lived examples to talk about what we think our respective involvement as regulator and system steward would be around this, and to try and make sure that we would approach them in the ways that are complementary and not duplicative. I would add that that is the same way that we're approaching work with the National Student Ombudsman and also the gender-based violence regulator in the department. We're aware of concerns of overlap and duplication, and we are looking at how to make sure that the work we do is complementary and not repetitive and duplicative.
Thank you. That's it for the questions. Over to you, Julie.
Great. All right, thank you, Lenka and Mary, and to our audience for great questions. I'd just like to add that as a regulator, transparency and clarity is really critical in communications. I'm going to be transparent and say that in relation to the SRE on workplace obligations, I did have a moment of wondering if I'd paid that full amount on my campsite, actually. So I was present. I was present, but I just did have a moment. So I just wanted to say that in regards to the feedback that we get from consultation, pending what that means in how we take on the feedback and how that sort of shapes the final statement of regulatory expectations, we'll either send an email, you'll either receive an email from Dr. Mary Russell, or we will share through our usual TEQSA channels. So I just wanted to clarify that. I was definitely here and present, but camping was calling me as well. I hope you've all planned something special for the break. So that brings us to the end of TEQSA Talks today. So what now? So we'll share an email inviting your feedback on your experience this afternoon. And I really encourage you, so as Director of Comms and Engagement, we're really keen to make sure that we are delivering sort of transparent, timely and clear information so that you know what the expectations are and what the latest updates are. The next TEQSA Talks is pencilled in for 29th of July. And so that sounds a long way away, but it really isn't. Make sure that you actually pencil that date, so 29th of July 2026 from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. AEDT time into your diaries. We'll open up registrations closer to July for that one. And just to finish, I've got one housekeeping request for all of you, and that's simply to please remember to keep your primary contact details current with TEQSA. So where a change requires an update to the National Register, you need to submit a notification via the provider portal to let TEQSA know of any changes to the Principal Contact Officer, Head Office or website address, or Chief Executive Officer or equivalent moves and changes. Just keep us informed. Thank you for your cooperation. It ensures that we're always able to reach you then with the latest updates. So a big thank you to our speakers today, Mary, Jen, and Lenka, and to all of you who took the time to join us today and enjoy the upcoming break. Thank you.